You think you can just walk away from this?
Oh, that's say. That's right in the sea. I have nothing to say to you.
You think you could talk to me like that?
I need to see swagger. I'll talk to you however I want.
What would you do if the seat you paid for, the seat with your name on it, was suddenly declared off limits because of how you looked? Imagine boarding a late-night flight, ready to rest, only to be told, people like you don't belong here. That's exactly what happened to Dorian Vale, a calm but powerful CEO traveling alone, dressed simply, without his usual entourage. In those first tense minutes, he was shoved, questioned, and nearly removed from the very seat he had purchased, seat 1A in first class. But here's the twist. What no one on that plane knew was that Dorian wasn't just a passenger. He was the largest shareholder in the airline, and, with millions watching live through a viral stream, the humiliation of one man was about to ignite a firestorm that would shake the entire industry. Was this just one ugly incident, or was it the mirror of something much bigger? What happens when dignity collides with prejudice at 30,000 feet and justice refuses to stay quiet? Stay with us. Hit that like, share, and subscribe. Because this is the story of a night when the sky itself was forced to change. The hum of the airport was almost hypnotic. Rolling suitcases clicked against the polished floor. Departure boards flickered with destinations, and voices echoed in a dozen different languages. At Gate 27B, passengers gathered in a loose crowd, waiting to board the evening nonstop from New York to San Francisco. It was a typical flight, an ordinary day until it wasn't. Dorian Vale stood quietly at the back of the line, dressed simply in a charcoal hoodie, dark jeans, and well-worn sneakers. He blended easily into the sea of travelers, just another man carrying a black leather duffel and a folded boarding pass. What no one around him knew was that Dorian Vale wasn't just any passenger. He was the CEO of Aurelius Air, a rising airline he had built from nothing into one of the most innovative carriers in the industry. Tonight, however, he wasn't boarding with a title. He was boarding as a test. For months, whispers had reached his ears, complaints about subtle discrimination, stories of passengers being judged by their clothes, their accents, or simply their skin color. Dorian wanted to see the truth with his own eyes. No press releases, no corporate shield, just him, walking through the system he was responsible for. As the gate agent scanned boarding passes, the line moved forward. Families with strollers, business travelers tapping out emails, college students with oversized backpacks. Dorian stepped up when his turn came, sliding his ID and pass across the counter. The gate agent glanced briefly before forcing a polite smile. "First-class boarding?" she asked, her tone edging skepticism. "Yes," Dorian replied evenly, his voice calm, steady. Her fingers hovered over the scanner. "All right, seat 1A." She clipped the stub and handed it back, but her eyes lingered longer than necessary, studying him as if waiting for a flaw to reveal itself. Dorian felt the familiar sting and echo of 1,000 small humiliations, but he said nothing. He simply nodded and walked down the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, the cabin lights glowed soft and warm. First class was nearly full. Polished leather seats stretched wide, offering comfort and privacy. But when Dorian approached row 1, placing his bag overhead, he felt the air shift. Celeste Marrow, one of the senior flight attendants, froze when she saw him settling into 1A. She was tall, poised, her blonde hair tucked neatly into a bun, her uniform crisp. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass again?" she asked. Dorian looked up, surprised. "I already showed it at the gate." "Yes," Celeste said smoothly, "but we double-check here for first class, company policy." It wasn't company policy, and Dorian knew it. He had written the policy. Still, he handed her the pass without complaint. She studied it longer than necessary, then returned it with a too bright smile. "Enjoy your flight," she said, but her eyes flicked toward another attendant across the aisle. Dorian exhaled slowly. He could already feel the storm brewing. Moments later, Clinton Rourke, a white passenger in his late 40s with a tailored blazer and the smug confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted, dropped heavily into seat 1B beside Dorian. He barely glanced at him before pressing the call button. Celeste appeared instantly, her smile genuine this time. "Mr. Rourke, welcome aboard." Clinton leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound conspiratorial. "You sure this guy belongs up here?" he asked, jerking his chin toward Dorian. The words weren't subtle, and Dorian heard them clearly. His jaw tightened, but he didn't move. He had promised himself he wouldn't reveal who he was, not yet. Tonight was about observation, not confrontation. Celeste's smile flickered, and instead of correcting Clinton, she gave the faintest nod. "We'll make sure everything is in order," she whispered. As boarding continued, Dorian stared out the window, the runway lights glowing in the dusk. His mind drifted back to his childhood, to his father coming home one night from work at a hotel, shoulders heavy, voice quiet, fired for being out of place. That memory had driven Dorian to build Aurelius Air, to create a place where dignity wasn't conditional. But here he was, decades later, in his own airline, watching the same patterns play out. When the last group of passengers boarded, Iris Navarro, the purser, entered the cabin. Her presence was commanding, her uniform immaculate, her voice crisp as she greeted the first-class cabin. She was the kind of leader who prided herself on control, on discipline, and she carried herself like the cabin was her kingdom. Her eyes fell on Dorian. For a fraction of a second, her brow furrowed. Then she smiled tightly. "Good evening," she said, but her tone wasn't warm, it was wary. Dorian offered a polite nod. "Good evening." She lingered, studying him before moving down the aisle. It didn't take long. Minutes before pushback, Celeste returned. Her smile sharpened into something colder. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification again," she said quietly. Dorian turned, his patience thinning. "You've already seen it twice?" "Yes, but we need to confirm your credit card matches the ticket. Just a quick verification." "That's not standard procedure," Dorian replied, his voice calm but clipped. Clinton chuckled from the next seat, pulling out his phone. "See, I told you. These people always try to sneak in." He said it casually, as if it were small talk. The words cut sharper than knives. Dorian's heart thudded, but his face remained still, inside. Though the conflict roared fight, or wait. Reveal the truth now, or let them show the world who they really were. He leaned back, folding his hands on his lap. "You have everything you need," he said quietly. Celeste frowned, frustration flashing in her eyes. She turned toward Iris at the galley. "He's refusing to cooperate," she whispered, but loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Phones tilted. Passengers glanced over, curious. Among them was Selene Ortiz, a young journalist traveling in coach who had slipped into the first-class aisle to stow her camera bag. She froze, sensing tension, then quietly lifted her phone, pressing record. Dorian closed his eyes briefly, steadying his breath. He knew what was happening, and he knew this was no longer just about him. The plane hadn't even left the ground, but the storm had already begun. The last overhead bins slammed shut. The captain's voice floated from the cockpit, calm and steady, promising an on-time departure. But in row 1, the tension was already so thick it felt like the air had shifted, pressing down on every passenger close enough to witness what was happening. Dorian Vale remained still in seat 1A, his hands folded on his lap, his breathing slow and deliberate. On the outside, he was a picture of composure. Inside, however, his mind pulsed with a storm. He had faced boardrooms filled with billionaires, senators, regulators, all of them trying to undermine him at one point or another. But nothing felt quite like this sitting anonymously in his own company's aircraft, forced to endure suspicion not because of what he had done, but because of who he was. Celeste Marrow hovered in the aisle, her arms crossed, her tone sharpened to something almost hostile. "Sir," she said, her voice low but firm, "if you refuse to cooperate, we'll have no choice but to involve ground security before we leave this gate." Several passengers shifted uneasily in their seats. A woman across the aisle whispered to her husband, "Why are they singling him out?" Clinton Rourke smirked, leaning back with his phone in hand. He had started streaming quietly, his lips close to the microphone. "First class, folks," he muttered, "where they let anybody sit down these days." His followers, small compared to Celine Ortiz's growing audience, still responded quickly with laughing emojis and comments filled with venom. Dorian turned his head slightly, his gaze cutting into Clinton. "Do you always speak this freely when strangers are sitting inches away from you?" His tone was controlled, precise, but it silenced Clinton for a moment. Before Clinton could reply, Iris Navarro stepped forward from the galley. Her expression was professional, but her eyes were calculating. "What seems to be the issue?" "Celeste. This passenger refuses to provide additional verification," Celeste explained quickly. "He insists he belongs in 1A, but he showed his boarding pass and ID." Dorian interrupted calmly. "Twice. Both were valid." The surrounding passengers went quiet, the kind of silence that wasn't neutral but charged, as though everyone was waiting for someone to snap. Iris looked down at him, her hands clasped in front of her waist. "Sir, this is a premium cabin. We have a responsibility to ensure that all tickets are legitimate. There have been incidents before." The words hung in the air. Incidents, a thinly veiled code, dressed as professionalism but rooted in something much older, darker. Dorian's jaw flexed, but he spoke with measured restraint. "And do these incidents always involve passengers who look like me?" A ripple moved through the cabin. The young man in 2A, dressed in a navy blazer, leaned forward slightly, his brows drawn tight. "I saw his name flash on the boarding screen when we checked in." He said, "Seat 1A. Confirmed." Iris shot him a sharp look, the kind that silenced dissent without a word. "Sir, we appreciate your input," she said curtly, before turning back to Dorian. At the rear of first class, Celine Ortiz adjusted her phone, whispering softly into her mic. "It's happening right now. They've checked him twice, and they're still pressing him. My viewers are already asking why the red live icon glowed in the corner of her screen as comments poured in. climbing by the dozens every second. Dorian closed his eyes for a moment, pulling himself inward. A memory struck hard, uninvited, the sound of his father's voice decades ago, telling him quietly that sometimes survival meant silence. But silence hadn't stopped his father from being humiliated. Silence hadn't changed the world. When Dorian opened his eyes, the calm was still there, but underneath it ran steel. "You have my documents," he said softly to Iris. "You have my ticket. You have my ID. If you wish to escalate this, then do it openly, not under the guise of policy." Clinton let out a short laugh. "Look at him," he muttered loudly enough for others to hear, trying to sound like he's in charge. Before anyone could respond, Iris leaned down slightly, her voice clipped. "Sir, either provide another form of verification or prepare to be escorted off this flight." The words detonated like a bomb in the cabin. Gasps broke out. Phones rose higher. The tension, once subtle, now spilled into the open. Celine's voice cracked through her live feed. "Did you hear that she's threatening to remove him from the flight, even after confirmed documents? This is escalating fast." A mother holding her toddler whispered. "This doesn't feel right." Amara Wynne, one of the junior attendants who had been silently watching, shifted her weight. Her throat tightened as she remembered her own training sessions. The subtle but clear directives from supervisors about passengers who don't match the profile. She had never spoken out before. She had always stayed quiet, telling herself it wasn't her fight. But watching Iris and Celeste corner Dorian, something inside her stirred. Still, fear held her tongue. Dorian sat back slowly, folding his hands once more. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice so calm it almost sounded detached. But every passenger within earshot felt the gravity behind it. Gregory Flint's voice crackled suddenly over the intercom. "This is Ground Supervisor Flint. We've been notified of a possible fraudulent boarding in first class. Cabin crew. Confirm details." Celeste grabbed the phone, her voice quick, eager. "Yes, Supervisor. Passenger in 1A is refusing to comply with verification procedures." Several passengers shifted again, murmurs rising. The young man in 2A shook his head in disbelief. "Fraudulent? Are you kidding? He showed his ID right here," Celine whispered fiercely into her mic. "Viewer count just hit 1,500. People are furious. The chat is exploding with accusations of profiling." Clinton smirked wider, as if savoring the drama. About time someone cleaned up the riffraff in here. Dorian turned toward him fully now, his gaze sharp as glass. "Careful with your words," he said quietly. "They reveal more about you than they ever will about me." For the first time, Clinton faltered. The cabin was no longer just a space for passengers awaiting takeoff. It was a stage, and the story unfolding was no longer private. Phones recorded, live streams climbed. Every glance, every whispered remark was captured, magnified, and broadcast beyond the walls of the aircraft. Amara's pulse pounded. She took a shaky step forward, her voice trembling. "He's telling the truth. His name is in the system. I saw it during boarding." Iris spun on her, eyes blazing. "Amara, stay in your lane." But the young attendant didn't step back. Her voice steadied. "We're supposed to treat every guest with dignity. That's in our handbook. Why are we ignoring that now?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Passengers stared, some whispering words of support, others simply stunned at the open defiance. Celine's whisper was urgent. Over 3,000 people live right now. They're calling this discrimination in real time. Gregory Flint's voice returned over the intercom. Harder this time. Cabin crew, secure the situation. If the passenger refuses, remove him. We can't delay departure. Dorian inhaled deeply, a slow, steady breath that steadied not only himself but everyone watching him. Then he reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. He typed a short message with calm precision. To his assistant, back at Aurelius headquarters, "It's happening." He slid the phone back into his pocket and looked straight at Iris. "If you want me off this plane," he said softly, "you'll have to explain to everyone here and everyone watching why." The murmurs swelled, the phones stayed high, and the aircraft, still rooted at the gate, suddenly felt like the center of the world. And for Dorian Vale, the test he had set for himself was no longer just an observation. It was about to become a reckoning. The plane should have been pushing back by now, but instead it sat still at the gate, the engines humming softly as if waiting for a verdict. Every passenger in first class knew they weren't going anywhere until the drama in row 1 played out. The cabin had turned into a courtroom, and Dorian Vale sat in the defendant's chair, calm but unyielding. Iris Navarro stood tall at the front, her arms folded, her posture radiating authority. Celeste Marrow hovered at her side, feeding her fragments of accusations. Clinton Rourke leaned back smugly, enjoying the spectacle like a man with front-row seats to a show he believed he was directing. And Amara Wynne, the young flight attendant, remained rooted halfway down the aisle, her hands clenched at her sides, torn between fear and conscience. Selene Ortiz's phone captured it all. She whispered into her mic, her voice trembling with urgency. "We're live with over 5,000 people now. The crew is escalating against a passenger who has already shown ID and ticket multiple times. You can feel the tension in here. People are scared. People are angry." Dorian adjusted his posture, sitting straighter in 1A, his eyes steady, his voice calm when he finally spoke. "I've complied with every request. I've shown every document required. And yet, here we are, circling the same ground. This isn't about verification anymore. This is about perception." The words cut through the air, sharp but controlled. Several passengers nodded subtly, murmuring among themselves. The mother with the toddler from 2 rows back whispered, "He's right. They're treating him differently." Iris's jaw tightened. She wasn't accustomed to losing control of a cabin, and her pride bristled at being challenged so openly. "Sir, this isn't a debate," she snapped. "It's a matter of safety and protocol. If you cannot cooperate, we will ask security to remove you." Clinton chuckled loudly, tilting his phone toward Dorian as if capturing evidence. "Go ahead, sweetheart," he said to Iris, his voice oily. "We've all seen this kind before. Think they're entitled to everything." The disdain in his voice rippled like poison through the cabin. A few passengers looked away, ashamed of his brazenness, while others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to speak. Dorian turned his gaze on Clinton, his tone still even but colder now. "You should choose your words carefully. They don't just describe me. They expose you," Clinton sneered, but for a fleeting moment. The smirk faltered. Amara took a hesitant step forward. Her voice wavered, but she found the courage to speak. "Mr. Navarro," she said, addressing Iris directly. The system already confirmed his name. "His boarding pass matches the manifest. He belongs in 1A. I don't see the justification for escalating this further." The entire cabin seemed to inhale at once. A flight attendant openly challenging her purser was almost unthinkable. Iris whipped her head toward Amara, her eyes blazing. "You're out of line. Return to your station immediately." But Amara didn't move. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her fear visible, but her conviction stronger. Respectfully, "This isn't right," she said. "We're supposed to serve with dignity, not suspicion." A soft gasp came from the passengers. The young man in 2A muttered, "Finally, someone said it." Selene whispered urgently into her mic, "Did you hear that a junior attendant just stood up against her superior? Viewers are calling her brave. We're passing 9,000 live." Gregory Flint's voice boomed over the intercom once again. Harder this time. "Cabin crew, remove the passenger from seat 1A immediately. Failure to comply will be considered insubordination." The order electrified the cabin. The two uniformed security staff who had been waiting at the front door stepped cautiously down the aisle, their eyes scanning the room. They weren't eager. They could feel the storm in the air, see the phones raised like 100 tiny cameras ready to immortalize their every move. Iris straightened, emboldened by the order. "You heard the supervisor," she said, her voice rising. "Sir, stand up. You're leaving this aircraft." Dorian remained perfectly still. He didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch. "No," he said softly, just one word, but it reverberated like a bell. The refusal seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the roar of engines. Passengers exchanged looks, whispers turning into louder protests. "He has every right to be here," someone said from the back of the cabin. "This is harassment." Another added. Clinton slammed his palm on the armrest. "He's holding up all of us. Just throw him out already." Selene's viewers shot past 12,000. The comments filled with outrage, hashtags forming in real time. Aurelius bias. Seat 1A, flying while black. Her fingers trembled as she held the phone steady, knowing she was capturing something far bigger than one confrontation. Dorian leaned back slowly, his gaze sweeping across the cabin, meeting the eyes of passengers one by one. His voice carried a quiet strength that commanded attention. "You're all witnesses," he said, "witnesses to how quickly suspicion replaces service, how dignity is traded for prejudice." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I will not be moved simply because some of you have already decided I don't belong." The mother with the toddler clutched her child closer, her own eyes wet with anger. The young man in 2A raised his phone higher, saying loudly, "He's right. This isn't justice. This is profiling." The security officers hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. Neither wanted to be the first to touch him. They could feel the eyes of the cabin, the weight of judgment, and the unseen pressure of thousands watching online. Amara's heart pounded as she stepped forward again, her voice stronger this time. "I can't let this happen. He belongs here. And if we remove him, we're not just removing a passenger, we're removing our integrity." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Iris faltered for a moment, her iron facade cracking. Celeste tugged at her sleeve, whispering frantically, "This is spiraling. People are recording. Maybe we should." "Enough," Iris snapped, silencing her. But her voice no longer carried the same certainty. Dorian looked down at his phone briefly, unlocking it with calm precision. He sent a message. Short but final systems ready. Stand by. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned his attention once again to Iris. "If you choose to proceed, you won't just answer to me," he said, his tone measured but heavy with promise. "You'll answer to the world." Celine's voice trembled as she whispered to her live audience, "We're at 15,000 viewers. The chat is exploding. Everyone's asking who this man really is. People are demanding answers." For a moment, Iris said nothing. Her pride wrestled with the growing realization that the situation had slipped beyond her control. Clinton's smugness faltered. Celeste's confidence waned. Amara's courage burned brighter. And, in the center of it all, Dorian Vale sat unshaken, a man accused, cornered, yet somehow commanding the room with nothing but his calm refusal to bend. The engines still hummed softly outside, but inside the cabin the turbulence had already begun. The air in the cabin felt heavy, thick with tension and the weight of too many unspoken truths. The plane remained motionless at the gate, but every second stretched like an eternity. No one was focused on departure anymore. All eyes were locked on the drama unfolding in row 1, where Dorian Vale sat firm in his seat, refusing to be broken. Iris Navarro stood in the aisle like a judge ready to deliver sentence. Celeste Marrow lingered at her side, her features taut with nervousness but her posture still siding with authority. Clinton Rourke leaned back smugly, his phone angled to capture Dorian like a trophy of humiliation, and Amara Wynne, trembling but resolute, stayed near, unwilling to retreat despite Iris's earlier command. "Mr. Vale," Iris said coldly, her voice echoing across the cabin, "you are disrupting this flight. If you continue to resist security, you will be removed by force. This is your final warning." Several passengers gasped at her words. One man shook his head in disbelief. A woman clutched her armrest as though bracing for violence. Even the security officers who had been summoned hesitated at the threshold, uncertain of whether to act. Dorian's eyes lifted slowly, meeting Iris's stare. His voice was quiet but carried with clarity. "Removed for what? For sitting in the seat I purchased? For complying with every request until you decided my presence was unacceptable?" His calmness only sharpened the edge of the confrontation. The injustice was no longer hidden in the folds of policy, it stood naked before everyone. Clinton scoffed loudly, ensuring his commentary carried across the cabin. "Stop playing victim. If you don't belong here, you don't belong. It's that simple. We're wasting time." The mother with the toddler in row 3 whispered furiously, "This is wrong. He hasn't done anything." The man in 2A raised his phone higher. "This is discrimination. I'm recording too." Selena Ortiz's voice whispered into her mic as her live stream audience surged past 20,000. "You're hearing it. Right now. Passengers are speaking out. This is no longer just one man against the crew. The tide is turning." But Iris was not a woman accustomed to losing control. She took a step closer to Dorian, her heels clicking against the floor. Her voice sharpened to a blade. "You will stand up, sir, now." When Dorian didn't move, Celeste reached down, her hand brushing against his arm as if to pull him from the seat. The contact was brief, but the gesture was explosive. Phones captured the shove, however slight, and within seconds, the live-stream comments detonated with fury. "Did you see that Celine's voice cracked? She just put her hands on him. This is assault." The cabin erupted in murmurs, anger and disbelief mixing like wildfire. A passenger shouted from the back, "You can't treat him like that," Celeste recoiled, realizing too late the gravity of her action. Her face flushed, her confidence faltering. "I was only what?" Dorian interrupted, his voice low but commanding. "Only manhandling a passenger who has done nothing but sit in his seat." The silence after his words was deafening. Every passenger in first class felt it, and those watching online could sense it through their screens. For the first time, Iris's mask of control cracked. She turned toward the security officers, her voice clipped and desperate. "Remove him now." But the officers hesitated. One of them, a man in his 40s with kind eyes, glanced at Dorian, then at the sea of phones trained on them. He spoke softly, almost reluctantly. "Ma'am, with respect, this doesn't feel justified." Iris glared at him. "It is not your place to question crew authority." Amara's voice cut through, trembling but bold. "He belongs here. I saw the manifest. His name is right there in 1A. You can't deny that." Passengers erupted with agreement. The young man in 2A shouted, "She's right. I saw it too. He's legit." Celine's live stream soared to 30,000. Comments screamed across the screen, "Expose them. Justice for seat 1A." "We're watching history happen." Clinton's smugness faltered under the growing wave of voices. He shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "You people don't understand how airlines work." But nobody was listening to him anymore. The narrative had shifted. Dorian was no longer a silent target. He had become the center of a growing movement right there in the cabin. He leaned forward slightly, his hands still folded, his voice steady but resonant. "Look around you. This isn't just about me. This is about the ease with which suspicion replaces respect, about how quickly some people are ready to strip dignity away. If it can happen to me, it can happen to any of you." The words hit like a wave. Passengers nodded. Some murmured in agreement. The mother in row 3 whispered, "He's right. This could be any of us." Celine whispered urgently, 40,000 viewers now. The chat is calling this a civil rights moment in the sky. Iris's face hardened, but behind her eyes a flicker of doubt crept in. She glanced at Celeste, whose composure had crumbled, then at Amara, whose courage burned hotter with every passing second. Gregory Flint's voice crackled once more over the intercom, but this time it sounded less confident. "Cabin crew, update me." "What is the situation?" Iris pressed the phone to her lips, her voice trembling despite her attempt at control. "The passenger is still refusing to comply. The cabin is becoming unruly." Dorian's head turned, his voice rising just enough for all to hear. "Unruly." He let the word linger, incredulous, "because I dared to stay seated in the place I paid for, because I dared to exist here without apology." The cabin fell silent again, the weight of truth pressing down. Celine's audience surged past 50,000. The live stream chat was relentless, calling for accountability, tagging news outlets, demanding justice. One of the security officers finally stepped back, shaking his head. "We're not removing him. Not like this. Not when every passenger's telling us he belongs here." The declaration sent a ripple through the cabin, a collective exhale of relief and defiance. Iris's authority had fractured. Celeste looked down, shame flushing her cheeks. Clinton's phone lowered, his bravado gone. Amara's eyes shone with quiet determination. She stepped closer to Dorian, her voice soft but firm. "You don't have to face this alone. we see what's happening. For the first time since boarding, Dorian allowed himself a faint smile, not of triumph, but of solidarity. He nodded once, acknowledging the courage around him. But, deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The world outside this cabin hadn't yet seen the truth of who he was, or what power he carried, and when that truth came to light, the reckoning would be swift and unstoppable. The plane remained at the gate, the engines idle, but in that moment the cabin was the most watched stage in the world, and Dorian Vale, calm and unshaken, had already begun to turn humiliation into something far more powerful. The plane's cabin had become so still, it was as if the air itself was listening. Every eye was on row 1, every phone raised like a tiny witness to the unraveling of order. The plane should have been in the sky by now, but instead, the gate remained connected, the tension tethering everyone to a conflict none of them had expected when they booked their tickets. Gregory Flint's voice crackled again over the intercom, his tone sharper, laced with authority that bordered on arrogance. "Cabin crew, secure the situation immediately. If the passenger refuses to comply, he is to be escorted off the aircraft. This flight will not depart until order is restored." The words dropped like weights. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered in anger, others in disbelief. The security officers at the front stiffened, clearly torn. They were supposed to follow orders, but the presence of dozens of recording phones made every move feel like stepping onto a minefield. Clinton Rourke seized the moment, his voice dripping with self-importance. Finally, he sneered, "It's about time someone with authority stepped in. We can't let people like this delay the rest of us." He leaned closer to Dorian, his grin cruel. "You think you're special, you're not. You're just holding us hostage with your little act." Dorian's head turned, his gaze steady, almost chilling in its restraint. His voice was calm, measured. "People like this. Tell me, Mr. Rourke, exactly what do you mean by that?" Clinton's smirk faltered. He looked around, suddenly aware the cameras pointed at him. For a man who enjoyed performing cruelty, being forced to say the quiet part aloud was dangerous. He swallowed, shifting uncomfortably. "You know what I mean," he muttered, but softer now, his confidence bleeding away. The young man in 2A leaned forward, his own phone raised high. "Say it louder," he challenged. "Go on. Everyone's recording. Don't hide now." Clinton froze, caught between arrogance and self-preservation. For the first time, he leaned back in his seat, lips pressed tight, his earlier bravado shrinking under the heat of scrutiny. Iris Navarro, still desperate to reclaim control, gestured sharply to the security officers. "Do your job. Remove him." But the older officer shook his head slightly, his voice low but firm. "Not without cause. Ma'am, we've seen his documents. We've heard the passengers. Removing him like this could be a serious violation." The refusal rippled through the cabin like a spark through dry grass. Murmurs of support grew louder, passengers emboldened by the sight of authority hesitating. Gregory Flint's voice came again, now filled with anger. "If cabin crew and security cannot manage this situation, I will come down myself. But be advised, every delay costs this airline thousands of dollars. Handle it, or I will." The threat wasn't just about money, it was about power, about making an example. Celeste Marrow's composure cracked further. Her voice wavered as she whispered to Iris, "Maybe we should stop. This is going too far." Everyone's film and Iris silenced her with a glare. We follow protocol. That's all that matters. But it was no longer about protocol. Everyone knew it. The passengers felt it in their bones. The live stream, now surging past 70,000 viewers, hummed with comments. Expose them. Don't back down. This is history. Selene Ortiz's voice trembled as she narrated softly into her mic. Viewers, what you're seeing is a power struggle in real time. A man accused of nothing but sitting in his seat is being threatened with removal, and the world is watching. Dorian's eyes closed briefly, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Inside, the storm threatened to break. Memories clawed at him the night his father had been dragged from a train for sitting in the wrong carriage. The shame in his father's eyes, the quiet rage that had shaped Dorian's life. He had built Aurelius Air to be different, to be better. And yet, here he was, in his own creation, facing the same poisoned script. His thoughts warred. Should he reveal himself now, end this farce with a single truth, or should he let it play out? Let the system expose itself before the world, the temptation to strike, to unleash his authority, pulsed in his veins. But a deeper instinct urged patience. When he opened his eyes, the calm returned, stronger than before. His voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the cabin. You're threatening to remove me, to disgrace me, without cause. But remember, this dignity is not yours to grant or to take. It belongs to me, and I will not surrender it. The words landed like stone. Passengers erupted in murmurs, some clapping softly, others nodding vigorously. The mother with the toddler whispered fiercely, God bless him. Amara Wynne, trembling but inspired, stepped closer once more. Her voice broke but did not falter. He's right. This isn't safety. This isn't protocol. This is prejudice, and I won't be part of it. Iris's face twisted, fury mixing with disbelief. You're finished. Amara, she hissed, you'll never work another flight. But Amara stood her ground, her chin lifted. If doing the right thing costs me my job, then so be it. The passengers burst into quiet applause. Phones captured every second. The live stream exploded. Comments flooding in, protect Amara, hero. She's risking everything. Clinton slumped back further. His earlier arrogance dissolved in the face of solidarity. Even Celeste, pale and shaken, seemed to shrink under the weight of what was unfolding. Gregory Flint's voice cut in one final time, sharp with impatience. Cabin crew, if you cannot resolve this, I will personally come down, and when I do, consequences will be swift. Dorian leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly. He spoke just loud enough for those around him to hear. Let him come. The calmness in his tone sent a chill through the cabin. Passengers exchanged wide-eyed glances. Even Iris hesitated, sensing that whatever power she thought she held was slipping, crumbling under the weight of Dorian's quiet defiance. Selene whispered urgently, 90,000 viewers. The chat is demanding to know his name, his identity. They can feel he's more than just a passenger. Something big is coming, and Dorian knew it too. He could feel the tide turning, the shift in the air as humiliation began to transform into something far more dangerous for those who had pushed him. The engines hummed on, silent witnesses to a reckoning that was no longer just about a seat in first class. It was about justice, and the storm gathering outside the walls of that cabin was only beginning to break. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as if the plane itself sensed the rising pressure. What should have been the gentle lull before takeoff had become an arena. phones hovered in the air like watchful eyes, catching every angle, every word. The audience beyond the cabin swelled by the minute. A silent but thunderous jury waiting for the next move. Clinton Rourke leaned forward again, his voice laced with venom. "This is pathetic. You're holding up a flight full of decent people because you can't accept that you don't belong here." His phone remained in his hand, but for once the smirk was gone. He was sweating slightly, though his pride pushed him to continue. "We all paid good money to be here. You think you're entitled to special treatment." Dorian Vale turned his head slowly, his gaze steady, the calm before a storm. Special treatment. His voice was low but carried across the rows. "I paid for this seat. I followed every rule. The only thing that makes this situation special is the color of my skin, and the fact that you think it grants you the right to decide where I belong." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. Clinton opened his mouth to reply, but the weight of the words pinned him in place. His jaw clenched, his confidence shriveling under the collective gaze of dozens of recording eyes. Selene Ortiz whispered into her phone as her live stream hit 6 figures. Over 100,000 watching right now. People are outraged. They're calling this a defining moment, demanding accountability. Iris Navarro's patience snapped. She stepped closer, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This ends now. You will stand up, or we will have you forcibly removed." "Do you understand?" Dorian's hands rested calmly on his lap. His face was composed, but inside, his heart pounded with the echo of old battles, memories of being pulled aside in airports, denied entry to places he had already paid for, silenced in meetings where his authority was questioned because of how he looked. The rage stirred, heavy and hot, but he forced it down, channeling it into steel. When he spoke, his words were measured, precise, each one carrying weight. "Do it, then. Put your hands on me. Drag me from this seat. Let the cameras record every second. Let the world see what dignity means in this cabin." Gasps rippled through the rows. A man shouted from the back, "He's right. If you touch him, you'll regret it." Amara Wynn's heart raced. Her palms were damp, but her voice found its strength again. "This isn't right. Iris, it's not procedure, it's prejudice, and everyone can see it." Iris's eyes blazed. "Enough. You're done here. Amara." But Amara didn't flinch this time. She stood taller, her voice clear and unwavering. "If doing my job means staying silent while we treat a man like this, then I don't want the job." The passengers applauded, a low rumble that grew louder. Phones caught the moment, and Celine's livestream comments erupted with praise for Amara. Celeste Marrow shifted uneasily, her confidence unraveling. She glanced at Dorian, then at the rows of phones pointed like weapons. "Iris, maybe we should reconsider. This is going viral. If we keep pushing, we'll all what Iris snapped, lose control. This is my cabin, my authority, and I will not let it be undermined." But control had already slipped. Every passenger could see it. The authority she clung to was crumbling, exposed under the light of truth. Gregory Flint's voice returned, harder than ever, vibrating with rage. "Cabin crew, if you don't remove him now, I'll come down myself. And when I do, there will be no negotiations." The passengers groaned audibly, some shouting in protest. "We're not moving until this is fixed," one man yelled. "He belongs here," another added. Dorian leaned back slightly, his calm radiating like armor. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, summoning the voice of his father again, the quiet dignity with which the older man had endured humiliation. But Dorian was not his father. He had sworn to build a world where men like his father didn't have to suffer in silence. When he opened his eyes, they were sharper, harder. His words rang out, quiet but unmistakably commanding. Enough of this charade. If you insist on forcing me out, then understand this: the damage will not end when I step off this plane. It will follow you, your crew, and this airline across every headline in the country. The passengers erupted in murmurs. Phones tilted closer. Celine's live stream crossed 120,000 hashtags, multiplying across social media like wildfire. Masa's seat 1A, flying while black, justice in the sky. Clinton muttered something under his breath, but the smirk was gone entirely. His phone lay forgotten in his lap, the comments on his small stream mocking him mercilessly. Celeste's face paled. Her hands shook slightly as she whispered, "Iris, we're going to lose everything. This isn't worth it." But Iris doubled down, her pride refusing to yield. "He will be removed," she said coldly, "if security won't do it." "I will." She reached down toward Dorian's arm. The entire cabin froze, every passenger holding their breath, every phone trained on the moment. Dorian did not move. He simply turned his head, meeting her gaze with eyes so calm and unflinching that the strength in them seemed to radiate outward. "Touch me," he said softly, "and watch what happens next." The power in his voice sent a shiver through the cabin. Iris's hand hovered, trembling, then slowly withdrew. The silence that followed was electric, broken only by the soft whimper of the toddler in row 3. Celine whispered, her voice trembling with awe, "You saw it. Everyone saw it." He didn't raise his hand. He didn't shout, but he stopped her cold. "This is bigger than a flight. This is a stand." The older security officer cleared his throat, his voice steady, decisive. "I'm not removing him, and neither is anyone else." He stepped back, folding his arms, his partner reluctantly following his lead. Passengers applauded again, louder this time, a wave of defiance. Iris's face flushed crimson, her authority shattered in the face of open resistance. Celeste lowered her eyes, shame burning in her cheeks. Clinton slumped against his seat, small and silent, and Dorian Vale, still seated in 1A, breathed deeply, his composure unbroken. He knew this was only the first battle. The true reckoning was yet to come. But, for now, he had won something powerful. He had shown the world that dignity could not be stripped by force, and that silence, when chosen carefully, could roar louder than any shout. Outside, the night deepened over the runway. Inside, the cabin was a crucible, a place where humiliation had transformed into defiance, and where a man who refused to move had shaken the balance of power. The cabin air was thick with tension, but something had shifted. The passengers no longer looked like passive travelers waiting for orders. They had become witnesses, defenders, and amplifiers of truth. Phones pointed steadily at the unfolding confrontation, each screen a glowing testament to the moment. Selene Ortiz glanced at her viewer count again and nearly gasped aloud. 212,000, she whispered, barely believing her own eyes. This is history. Clinton Rourke sat in stunned silence. His earlier bravado drained from his face. His phone buzzed in his hand, the chat on his own live stream tearing him apart. Comments scrolled mercilessly, entitled "Clown," "Caught red-handed." You picked the wrong guy." His jaw tightened, but the words he wanted to say stuck in his throat. Iris Navarro, however, refused to accept defeat. Her pride burned hotter than the reality surrounding her. She straightened her shoulders and barked, "Captain Flint, I need you here now. This passenger is endangering our departure. If you don't act, I will declare him a security threat." Her voice carried through the cabin, sharp, brittle, almost desperate, but it no longer commanded respect. Instead, it drew murmurs of dissent from the rows behind her. "He's not a threat," a woman in business attire said firmly. "He's the only one keeping calm here." Amara Wynn's voice joined in, stronger now, her fear replaced by conviction. "Captain, you need to hear me. I checked his ticket. His seat is confirmed. He belongs here. The only danger is the way he's being treated." The cabin door opened, and Captain Gregory Flint strode out from the cockpit. His uniform was pristine, his posture rigid, but his eyes betrayed irritation at being summoned. "What's the holdup?" he demanded, his deep voice cutting through the room. Iris wasted no time. "Captain, this passenger refuses to comply. He's disrupting the cabin, refusing lawful instructions and jeopardizing the flight." Gregory's gaze fixed on Dorian Vale. He narrowed his eyes, measuring the man in 1A, a man who sat with a quiet defiance, unshaken by the storm. "Sir," Gregory said, his tone icy, "I need you to vacate this seat immediately. Failure to comply will result in your removal from this aircraft." Gasps echoed across the rows. Phones tilted closer. The live stream audience soared again. Celine whispered breathlessly, "We just crossed 250,000. Everyone's watching this captain now." Dorian's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile, not of amusement, but of recognition. He had seen men like Gregory Flint before, men who mistook authority for justice, who thought the uniform excused the blindness of prejudice. He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm, deliberate. "Captain," he said evenly, "you're given an order without facts. My boarding pass shows this seat. My ID matches the reservation. I have followed every rule. If you insist I leave, then understand what you are doing. You are not upholding safety. You are humiliating a paying passenger because you cannot accept who he is." The passengers erupted in agreement. "He's right," one man shouted. "Check the manifest," another demanded. Gregory's eyes flicked briefly to Iris, who nodded furiously, urging him to press harder. "I don't need a debate," Gregory snapped. "This is my aircraft. My word is final." Dorian's calm deepened, an almost unnerving composure. "Your word is not final when it violates truth," he said quietly, but the words rang across the cabin with the weight of a hammer. "And it will not be final when the world sees how you used it tonight." Celine's voice shook as she updated her audience. "It's 300,000 now. Hashtags are everywhere. Justice in the sky is trending #1 worldwide." Clinton muttered under his breath, "This is ridiculous," but no one listened. His irrelevance had become complete. Amara stepped closer, placing herself between the captain and Dorian. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied. "Sir, please, I verified his ticket myself. The system shows his name, his seat. If you make this call, you'll be wrong, and it won't just be a mistake, it'll be recorded forever." Gregory hesitated, but pride anchored him in place. He straightened, doubling down. "If you refuse, I will have airport security meet us at the gate and take you into custody." That was the moment Dorian chose to lift the veil. Slowly, with deliberate grace, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped once, twice, and then placed it on the tray table. The screen lit up, connecting a secure call. A calm, commanding voice answered almost instantly. "Mr. Vale, this is Director Hanley. We're monitoring the situation." Gasps filled the cabin. The name meant nothing to most, but to a few who recognized it, those who worked in finance or corporate circles, it was seismic. Dorian's eyes never left Gregory's. "Captain," he said quietly, "you're making threats against the largest shareholder of this airline. Every word you've spoken is being logged, every action recorded. Do you understand the gravity of your position right now?" The cabin exploded in murmurs. Some passengers clapped, others whispered in disbelief. Celine nearly dropped her phone. "Oh my God," she breathed into her mic. "He owns a controlling stake. He's not just a passenger, he's the man behind the airline." Gregory's face drained of color. He stammered. That doesn't change procedure." "It changes everything," Dorian replied softly, though his words struck like thunder. "Because now, the procedure will be rewritten, and it will begin with how you answer for what just happened." Iris's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Celeste covered her face with her hands, realizing the magnitude of the disaster unraveling. Clinton slumped deeper into his seat, wishing to vanish. The passengers erupted into cheers, claps, and shouts of support. Phones shook as they captured the moment, the revelation spreading like wildfire across the world. Celine's live stream surged past 400,000. Her voice trembled with awe. This just changed everything. He's not just defending himself, he's dismantling the entire system in real time. Gregory Flint's authority, so rigid minutes ago, cracked under the weight of truth. His jaw worked, but no words came. Finally, he muttered, We'll review this at headquarters." Dorian leaned back, his calm unbroken. "No," he said. "We'll review it right here, right now, in front of every witness." The applause thundered again. For the first time that night, the balance of power had flipped completely. Dorian Vale was no longer the passenger under scrutiny. He was the standard against which everyone else would be judged. And as the plane sat motionless on the tarmac, with 500,000 viewers watching live, the truth was undeniable. A single man's quiet defiance had turned an airplane cabin into the epicenter of a reckoning that would echo far beyond the runway. The plane sat idle on the tarmac, but the energy inside the cabin felt like it was accelerating faster than any jet could fly. The revelation of Dorian Vale's identity rippled through every seat, every phone, every whisper. Passengers exchanged glances filled with disbelief, admiration, and relief. For once, the truth was visible to all, undeniable and permanent. Selene Ortiz adjusted her grip on her phone, her voice trembling as she addressed her audience. "Over 500,000 people are here right now. 500,000. They're watching history unfold live. The man they tried to humiliate is not just a passenger. He's the power behind this airline. And now the crew has nowhere to hide." Amara Wynne stood near Dorian's seat, her breathing unsteady but her posture firm. Her uniform felt heavier than ever, but her conscience felt lighter. She glanced down at him and spoke softly enough that only those nearby could hear. "I should have done more from the start. I'm sorry for how you've been treated." Dorian's gaze softened. He nodded once, the smallest gesture of acknowledgement, but one that carried weight. You did what mattered. You spoke when silence would have been easier. Don't underestimate that. Across the aisle, Celeste Marrow shifted in her shoes, staring down at her trembling hands. She wanted to disappear, to erase the words she had spoken, the complicity she had accepted. But it was too late. Phones were pointed everywhere, and accountability was no longer optional. Captain Gregory Flint still stood at the front of the cabin, his face pale, his authority fractured. He cleared his throat. His voice loosened the sharp edge it had carried moments before. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are resolving a situation." The passengers erupted in voices, louder than before, no longer content to whisper. "This isn't a situation, it's discrimination," a man in the middle row shouted. "I've flown this airline for years," a woman in a blazer added, her tone sharp. "I've seen it happen to others. I stayed quiet. I won't anymore." Phones tilted toward them as they spoke, their confessions amplifying across Celine's live stream. Another passenger, an elderly man with silver hair and a cane, struggled to stand. His voice cracked but carried clear. "Last year, I was made to wait at the gate for 40 minutes while they questioned whether I could afford my ticket. I didn't speak up because I didn't want to miss my flight. But it was this airline, this culture, and tonight proves it." The murmurs swelled into something stronger, a chorus of voices breaking years of silence. Celine turned her camera toward the crowd, her tone urgent. "Do you hear this? It's not just about one man. It's systemic. It's everywhere. And now people are finally saying it out loud." Iris Navarro's composure cracked visibly. Her eyes darted from passenger to passenger, her chest rising with shallow breaths. "This is out of control," she hissed. Her words meant only for Celeste, but caught on more than one phone. "They're turning on us." Celeste swallowed hard, her guilt clawing at her chest. "Maybe they're not turning on us," she whispered back. "Maybe they're finally telling the truth." Iris glared, her voice sharp and low. "Don't you dare betray me now." But Celeste's silence was no longer obedience. It was fear mixed with awakening. Dorian finally spoke again, his voice calm but resonant. "You see what's happening here? People silenced for years are speaking because they know this moment matters. They know the world is listening." He let his gaze sweep slowly across the rows, meeting the eyes of strangers who now looked at him as more than just a man in a seat. If dignity has conditions, then it was never dignity at all. And tonight, we prove that truth cannot be forced into silence. The applause came again, louder than before, filling the cabin with defiance. Gregory Flint pinched the bridge of his nose, frustration warring with fear. He lowered his voice, speaking toward Dorian but loud enough for the front rows to hear. "You're making this impossible. We can't take off like this. The company, the system, it's not built to handle. The system will handle it." Dorian interrupted softly. "Because it has no choice. Change is never convenient. Captain, it comes when people decide they won't tolerate injustice one moment longer." Celine's audience count ticked upward again, 600,000. Screenshots flooded social platforms, hashtags multiplied, commentators chimed in, live, lawyers, activists, journalists, each one amplifying the weight of what was happening at 30,000 feet, even before the plane had left the ground. Clinton Rourke finally spoke, his voice bitter but subdued. "This is a circus. He's milking it. He could have avoided all of this if he'd just moved." The woman in the blazer snapped back, her tone cutting. He doesn't have to move. You're the one who's been taking space that isn't yours, just like this airline has for years." Applause erupted around her, drowning out Clinton's muttered protest. He sank into his seat, his entitlement crumbling under the weight of exposure. Iris Navarro tried one last time to salvage control. She straightened her uniform, lifted her chin, and addressed the passengers. "We are the crew responsible for your safety. Undermining us undermines the integrity of this flight. Whatever grievances you may have, this is not the place." "This is exactly the place," Dorian cut in smoothly, his tone calm but unyielding. "Because this is where the injustice happened, and this is where it ends." The passengers clapped again, their loyalty now clear. The balance of power had shifted irreversibly. The crew, once in command, stood exposed, their authority crumbling with every passing minute. Amara looked at Dorian, her eyes glistening with quiet awe. She had never seen a man so composed under fire, so unwilling to let anger twist into chaos, yet so powerful in his restraint. She thought of her own silence in the past moments she had looked away, told herself it wasn't her place, and she vowed then that this would be different. Dorian reached for his phone again, tapping a few keys. His voice was calm but deliberate. "Mr. Hanley, patch me through to corporate legal and prepare a statement draft. We'll need it within the hour." The cabin gasped. Passengers leaned in closer, their phones capturing every word. Celine whispered breathlessly, "He's activating corporate response in real time. He's not just defending himself, he's changing the airline, right here on the runway." Gregory's face drained of color again. His authority was gone, replaced by the knowledge that every second was being documented, every word broadcast. The world was no longer on his side. Dorian's voice deepened slightly, carrying the gravity of a promise. "To everyone watching, hear me clearly. This will not be buried in silence. Every policy, every pattern, every story you've shared tonight will be investigated. This airline will not escape accountability." The cheers filled the cabin once more, louder than ever, a roar of vindication. The walls of the aircraft seemed to vibrate with the sound. For the first time since boarding, Dorian allowed himself a slow breath of release. He was no longer alone. The passengers had become his chorus, the live stream his megaphone, and the truth his shield. Outside the windows, the runway lights glowed in silent rows, waiting for the engines to roar, but inside, a different kind of journey had already begun. It was a journey not of miles, but of justice, carried not by wings but by the voices of those who refused to stay silent any longer. The plane was still bound to the gate, but inside, the cabin had transformed. It no longer resembled a place of quiet passengers waiting for departure. It was a stage, a courtroom, a tribunal carried thousands of feet below its intended altitude, and in the middle of it sat Dorian Vale, steady in his seat, calm as ever, but radiating the gravity of a man who knew the balance had tipped. The passengers, once silent and uncertain, were now restless with purpose. Phones hovered like lanterns in the dim cabin, capturing everything, sharing it with an audience that grew by the second. Celine Ortiz whispered hoarsely into her device, 700,000. We've hit 700,000 live. This is beyond viral. This is global." Dorian placed his phone carefully on the tray table. He looked up at the captain, then at the crew, and finally let his eyes sweep over the passengers. His voice was low, controlled, but every word carried. You wanted to make me stand. You wanted to strip my dignity away before these witnesses. Now, it is your turn to stand. One by one, you will account for your actions." The passengers gasped. Some clapped instinctively, the weight of his authority undeniable. Amara Wynne stood a little straighter beside him, her fear replaced by awe. She had never heard a voice so quiet, yet so commanding. Dorian's eyes fixed first on Iris Navarro. "Chief attendant," he said, his tone neutral but cutting. "Step forward. Explain why you chose to ignore my documents, why you threatened to remove me from a seat that was mine, and why you attempted to lay hands on me in front of witnesses." The color drained from Iris's face. For a moment, she stood frozen, her throat working as though the words were trapped inside. But the silence of the passengers, the gaze of the cameras, forced her to move. She stepped forward, her posture stiff, her voice shaking. "I was enforcing policy." She began. "Cabin authority requires us to address disruptions, to protect order on the flight. I believed you believed what Dorian interrupted softly, that I was less entitled to this seat than another passenger, that my presence itself was a disruption." The murmurs swelled. A woman's voice rang out from row 4. "Answer him." Iris's lips trembled. She tried again. "I made a judgment call. I was wrong." The phones captured every syllable. Dorian's face did not move, but his eyes sharpened. "You weren't wrong by accident. You were wrong by choice. A choice rooted in bias, not in safety. Do not mistake the difference." The cabin erupted in murmurs again, some passengers clapping, others nodding vigorously. Iris lowered her eyes, shame radiating from her like heat. Dorian turned next to Celeste Marrow. His voice softened, but the weight remained. "And you chose to touch me, to try to force me from my seat. Explain yourself." Celeste's hands shook as she clutched them together. Her voice cracked. I thought I was following orders. I didn't think. I didn't question. And I should have. I'm sorry." Her apology trembled, raw and thin, but it reached some of the passengers who murmured with a little compassion. Dorian studied her quietly before replying. "Obedience without conscience is complicity. Remember that." Celeste's shoulders sagged, the words striking harder than any punishment. Finally, Dorian turned his gaze to Captain Gregory Flint. The captain stood tall, his face tight with pride, but sweat dotted his temples. Dorian's words cut through the heavy air. "And you, Captain, you threatened to declare me a security risk, to have me arrested without cause. Explain yourself." Gregory swallowed, his jaw tightening. His voice was firm, but the cracks showed. "I acted as captain of this aircraft. My responsibility is order, safety, punctuality. The airline loses thousands with every delay." "My duty, your duty," Dorian interrupted, "is to truth, to fairness, to passengers who entrust their lives to you. Money does not justify stripping dignity. An order built on prejudice is not order, it is oppression." The applause came harder now. Passengers clapping, some even cheering. Phones wobbled in the air, live-stream chats exploding with praise. Celine's voice quivered with awe. 780,000. Nearly 800,000 watching this tribunal live. Gregory flinched at the word tribunal, because that's what it felt like. His authority, once absolute, was now on trial before the world. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. Finally, he looked down, his silence louder than denial. Dorian leaned back slightly, his calm returning like a tide settling after the storm. He spoke not just to the crew, but to every passenger, every viewer, every phone pointed his way. Accountability is not punishment. It is recognition of truth, and truth cannot be delayed, hidden, or denied. Tonight, this cabin became more than a vessel for travel. It became a vessel for justice. The cheers thundered. The elderly man with the cane clapped until his hand shook. The mother with the toddler whispered, "Finally." Someone said it. The woman in the blazer recorded a clip and sent it to her network, already crafting headlines in her head. Amara's eyes brimmed with tears she tried to hide. She had never believed change could happen in real time, in such a small space. But here it was, change unfolding in the airless cabin of a grounded plane. Dorian's phone buzzed on the tray table. He glanced at the screen. A message had come through from Director Hanley Crisis Board assembled, watching live, standing by for instructions. He placed the phone down again, his expression unchanging, but inside, a storm of calculation swirled. Every second here was being amplified beyond the cabin, beyond the airport, beyond the country. He could turn this moment into reform, into policy, into something that would last longer than outrage. Clinton Rourke, still slouched in his seat, muttered bitterly, "This is ridiculous. You're all acting like he's a saint." The elderly man snapped back, his voice sharper than anyone expected. "He's not a saint. He's a man who demanded dignity. Something you could learn from." Laughter, applause, and cheers rippled across the cabin. Clinton shrank further into his seat, humiliated, his role in the drama reduced to an afterthought. Dorian's gaze swept once more across the passengers. "You have all seen the truth tonight, but truth without voice dies in silence. Do not let it end here. Tell your stories, share your experiences, demand better, because justice is not a gift, it is a responsibility." The cabin roared again, voices unified, applause echoing off the walls. Celine nearly dropped her phone as the counter ticked past 850,000. "This is unstoppable," she whispered, half to herself, half to the world. "This is bigger than the airline. This is a movement." Dorian leaned back at last, his calm like a deep river. The storm wasn't over. There would be statements, investigations, consequences, but the balance of power had changed. For the first time in his life, he felt the world shifting in real time, not in a boardroom, not in a speech, but in a cabin full of ordinary people who had decided to speak. And as the plane sat under the night sky, still tethered to the gate, the cabin had already lifted off into something far greater than flight. The jet sat frozen at the gate, but inside the cabin the sense of movement was unstoppable. Word had spread beyond the live stream, beyond social media. News outlets had picked it up. Passengers scrolling through their phones could already see headlines forming "Airline faces reckoning at Gate 17. Passenger confronts bias, revealed as airline shareholder." Celine Ortiz's hands trembled as she tried to keep her phone steady. Her live stream counter ticked past 900,000, then surged toward 1,000,000. Her voice cracked, whispering into the mic, 1,000,000 live. This is the biggest stream I've ever seen. The world is tuned in right now. Amara Wynne felt her knees weaken as the reality sank in. She wasn't just a flight attendant anymore. She had become part of a moment that would be dissected by millions. She straightened her uniform, her fear still lingering, but she no longer wanted to disappear. She wanted to stand. Iris Navarro's face burned crimson. She tugged at her collar, sweat gathering at her temple. The power she once wielded with certainty was now a crumbling mask. Her voice wavered when she tried to speak, and no one listened. Phones turned away from her now. The narrative had left her behind. Celeste Marrow leaned against the galley wall, tears threatening to spill. She had no words. Every second of her complicity was immortalized on hundreds of screens. No apology could erase it, but perhaps facing it was the first step. Dorian Vale remained seated in 1A, a picture of composure. But inside, his mind was racing. The phone on his tray table buzzed again. Director Hanley's updates flashing across the screen. Crisis Board convened, legal drafting statement, CEO incoming. He ignored the phone for the moment, instead lifting his gaze to the passengers who were now silent, waiting. He spoke calmly, the quiet strength in his voice drawing them in. You have all seen the truth tonight, but truth demands more than witnesses. It demands change, and change begins with accountability. A murmur of agreement spread through the cabin. The elderly man with the cane lifted his phone and said, I've got 3 grandchildren. They're watching this right now. I want them to grow up in a country where this doesn't happen. The mother with the toddler raised her voice, steady despite the child squirming in her arms. I want my son to know dignity isn't something that can be given or taken away. It's his by right. The businesswoman in the blazer leaned forward, her voice sharp. I work in corporate law. I've seen discrimination buried in paperwork, hidden behind procedure. Tonight, it isn't hidden. It's broadcast. And that's the only way it changes, by dragging it into the light. Phones turned to her, amplifying her words. Celine's audience reacted instantly. Comments pouring in, yes, preach. This is bigger than a flight. Dorian nodded slightly, his face thoughtful but steady. You're right. This isn't about me alone. This is about every silent moment that was ignored. Every passenger who thought speaking up wouldn't matter. Tonight proves it does. Captain Gregory Flint stood at the front of the cabin, rigid, but his face betrayed fear. His headset crackled softly, and he turned away to mutter into it. The passengers could only catch fragments. Yes, he revealed it, millions watching. I don't know how to proceed. When he turned back, his face was pale. His voice tried for authority, but landed somewhere between nervous and resigned. Mr. Vale, corporate is aware of your situation. They've requested we deplane and move this discussion off the aircraft. The cabin erupted with protests. No way, shouted the man in row 3. You're not pushing this into a back room, another passenger yelled. Celine whispered urgently. Chat is exploding. They're saying, don't leave the cabin. Keep it public. Dorian raised his hand slightly, and the voices hushed. His calm was enough to draw silence out of chaos. He looked directly at Gregory. No, we stay here. The cameras stay on. There will be no cover-up. What happened in this cabin will be addressed in this cabin, in full view of the world. Applause shook the walls. Gregory flinched as though struck. His authority was shattered completely. His options reduced to submission or humiliation. Iris Navarro slumped into the jump seat, staring at the floor. For years, she'd been the unquestioned voice of authority in the cabin. Now, stripped of that power, she felt small, exposed, terrified of the consequences she had once so confidently handed out to others. Clinton Rourke groaned loudly, muttering, "This is insane. It's a flight, not a courtroom." The elderly man shot him a glare sharp enough to silence him. It became a courtroom when they tried to evict dignity from seat 1A. Laughter, applause, cheers followed. Clinton turned away, defeated, his phone buzzing relentlessly with ridicule. Dorian finally reached for his own phone. He tapped a button, and the call with Director Hanley went on speaker. A deep, controlled voice filled the cabin. "Mr. Vale, the board is assembled. The CEO is on his way to the terminal. We are ready for your instructions." The passengers gasped. Even Amara's mouth dropped slightly. To hear a boardroom voice pouring through the speakerphone in the middle of a cabin was surreal, like two worlds colliding. Dorian's voice remained even. "Director Hanley, the world is watching. Prepare to issue the following. This airline acknowledges the incident occurring on Flight 228 tonight. An immediate investigation will begin, with independent oversight, effective immediately. All staff involved are suspended pending review. And further, the airline commits to systemic reform in bias training and passenger equity." Phones shook as passengers tried to capture every word. Celine's live stream hit the million mark. Her voice quivered. "He's dictating corporate reform live, mid-flight. I've never seen anything like this." Gregory Flint paled further. He looked at Iris, who refused to meet his eyes. Celeste bit her lip hard, guilt and fear radiating. Hanley's voice came steady through the speaker. "Understood. Mr. Vale, it will be done. A statement will be released within the hour." Dorian ended the call, set the phone down, and leaned back slightly. He exhaled once, his calm restored. His gaze moved to the passengers, then to the crew. This is not about punishment. This is about change. And change starts now. The passengers erupted in cheers, clapping, whistling, shouting. The toddler clapped too, imitating his mother. For the first time, the atmosphere felt lighter, not because the injustice was gone, but because the tide had turned. Celine whispered to her mic, her voice shaken with awe. 1.2 million now. The comments are calling this the night dignity fought back at Gate 17. People are saying this will be remembered for years. Dorian Vale sat quietly, letting the noise wash over him. He had faced humiliation and turned it into truth. He had faced silence and transformed it into voices. And now he faced a system that would have no choice but to change. Outside, cameras from local media were already gathering at the terminal windows, drawn by the live stream. Reporters stood by with microphones, waiting for the passengers to emerge. But inside, the story had already been told, the verdict already reached. The cabin had become a court, and justice, at last, had found its witness. The cabin doors finally hissed open. A rush of cooler terminal air swept in, but the atmosphere inside the aircraft was already electrified. Passengers gathered their belongings, their phones still in their hands, still streaming, still recording. None of them wanted to stop. They understood they were carrying proof of history. Gregory Flint stood rigid at the cockpit door, his face pale, his lips pressed into a hard line. Iris Navarro avoided eye contact with everyone. Her shoulders hunched as though trying to disappear into her uniform. Celeste Marrow dabbed at her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. Silent, haunted by the weight of complicity. Clinton Rourke shoved his phone into his pocket, his posture deflated, his arrogance dissolved. Amara Wynne lingered near Dorian Vale, torn between duty and awe. She lowered her voice. "When we step off, the press will be waiting. This won't just be about the flight anymore." Dorian's gaze was calm, his voice steady. "I know. That's why it matters." Celine Ortiz whispered into her phone as she walked backward down the aisle. "Still filming. 1.3 million live. The gate is surrounded by press. They know what's coming. This isn't just an arrival, it's an event." The passengers began to file out, some glancing back at Dorian as if reluctant to leave his side, as if drawn to the gravity he carried. The elderly man tapped his cane once on the floor, offering Dorian a nod filled with respect before stepping into the jet bridge. The mother with the toddler mouthed, "Thank you," her eyes glistening as she passed. Finally. Dorian stood. The cabin fell into hushed silence again, as though everyone knew this next moment would be etched into memory. He adjusted his jacket, lifted his phone, and walked with measured steps toward the open door. Each step felt heavy, but it was not the heaviness of burden. It was the heaviness of purpose. The jet bridge was lined with airport staff and security. Some looked uncertain, others nervous, all aware of the millions of eyes watching through screens. Dorian walked steadily, his posture dignified, his pace unhurried. Amara followed just behind, her breath shallow but her resolve firm. Celine trailed them, camera up, her voice narrating every moment. As they neared the gate, the noise grew. The muffled sound of voices beyond the door swelled into a roar, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, the buzz of a crowd gathered for spectacle. When the door to the terminal slid open, the light from dozens of cameras burst into the space like a wave. Flashes lit the air, microphones thrust forward, voices overlapping in a chaotic storm. "Mr. Vale. Is it true you were threatened with removal, Mr. Vale? Do you intend to sue the airline, Mr. Vale? What changes will you demand?" Dorian paused just beyond the threshold, letting the questions crash against him. The crowd pressed forward, but the line of security officers held them back, creating a narrow path through the flashing lights. Celine's camera captured every second, her live stream counter surging again. 1.4 million, she whispered breathlessly. "He's stepping into history." Dorian lifted his hand slightly. The chaos softened, the roar fading to a murmur as though even the press understood they were not just covering a scandal, they were witnessing a statement. His voice was calm, unshaken, but carried with authority that cut through the noise. "Tonight, I was treated as though my dignity could be negotiated away. I was threatened, humiliated, nearly forced from a seat that was mine, not because of what I did, but because of who I am." The terminal hushed further. Cameras tilted closer. He continued, his tone steady, deliberate. "What happened on that aircraft is not an isolated incident. It is a mirror of what too many have endured quietly, believing their voices would not matter. But tonight, millions saw, millions heard, and millions will remember." Reporters shouted again, but this time with sharper focus. "Mr. Vale, what happens next? What will you do?" Dorian's gaze was firm, his words clear. "I will not just demand apologies. I will not just demand suspensions. I will demand reform, systemic, measurable, lasting, training, oversight, accountability. Because dignity should not depend on who happens to hold the power in a cabin. It should be guaranteed to every passenger, every time." Applause broke out, not just from the passengers who had walked with him, but from bystanders who had gathered near the gate, from airport staff who had followed the story on their phones. The sound was raw, unplanned, but powerful. Celine's live stream exploded. 1.5 million. They're calling this the speech at Gate 17. The comments are flooding in history, justice, never forget seat 1A. Amara's heart pounded. She had worked countless flights, seen countless passengers, but never in her life had she imagined standing behind a man who turned humiliation into a manifesto, who spoke with such calm authority that even chaos bowed before it. A reporter thrust a microphone closer. "Mr. Vale, are you calling for resignations?" Dorian paused, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he spoke slowly, each word carrying weight. "I am calling for accountability. If that means resignations, so be it. If that means new leadership, so be it. But understand this is not about vengeance. It is about justice. And justice does not stop at one flight. It spreads." The terminal erupted again. Questions, shouts, applause, the buzzing of cameras capturing every angle. Gregory Flint emerged from the jet bridge then, his face gray, his uniform disheveled. He tried to walk past quietly, but the press surged toward him. "Captain Flint, did you threaten Mr. Vale with removal, Captain? Do you regret your actions tonight?" His lips pressed tight, his eyes darting. He offered no words, just pushed through the crowd, his silence louder than denial. Iris Navarro trailed behind him, her head bowed, her jaw trembling. The cameras devoured her shame. Celeste followed, her face pale, tears streaking her cheeks. Clinton Rourke stumbled after them, his phone still buzzing with humiliation, his name already trending for all the wrong reasons. But the press turned back to Dorian. He was the gravity here. He was the story. He lifted his gaze once more, not to the reporters, not to the cameras, but to the passengers standing behind him, the elderly man, the businesswoman, the mother, Amara, Celine. His voice softened, but carried with equal strength. "This is bigger than me, bigger than tonight. But tonight will not be forgotten, and from this moment forward, neither will the people who stood and spoke when it mattered." The cheers rose again, echoing through the terminal, spilling into the concourses, spreading far beyond the airport. Celine whispered into her stream, tears slipping down her cheeks. 1.6 million. I can't even keep up. They're saying this is the moment dignity took flight. Dorian Vale stood in the glare of the cameras, surrounded by chaos, but untouched by it. He had turned humiliation into testimony, testimony into reform, and reform into something even larger, a movement. The world outside the terminal didn't yet know how deep the ripple would run. But tonight, inside Gate 17, everyone felt it. Something irreversible had begun. The terminal was still buzzing long after the passengers had scattered. Journalists were filing stories, hashtags were exploding across social platforms, and television networks cut into their late-night programming with live coverage from the airport. The incident on Flight 228 had already become more than a viral clip. It was a turning point. Dorian Vale stood near the cluster of microphones, his shoulders straight, his presence commanding without aggression. He could feel the weight of the crowd pressing in, the pulse of history quickening in the space around him. Yet inside, he carried both calm and fatigue. He had not asked for this spectacle, but now that it had come, he would not waste it. Behind him, Amara Wynne lingered, torn between fear of retaliation from her employer and pride in standing beside a man who refused to bow to injustice. Celine Ortiz kept her camera trained, her live stream counter holding at nearly 1.7 million. The audience was global now. One of the reporters shouted, "Mr. Vale, do you think tonight will change the airline industry?" Dorian's pause was deliberate. He knew every syllable would travel far beyond this terminal. "Change is not automatic," he said firmly. "It comes when we demand it, when we refuse to let humiliation be brushed aside as routine. Tonight is proof that silence is no longer an option, and I intend to hold this airline accountable for more than an apology. I intend to hold them accountable for reform." At that moment, a ripple moved through the crowd. Jonathan Cross, the airline's CEO, strode into the terminal surrounded by executives and corporate security. His polished suit contrasted starkly with the wrinkled uniforms of his shaken crew. His expression was tight, but his pace was quick, as though urgency itself was pulling him forward. The press swiveled, cameras flashing wildly. "Mr. Cross, Mr. Cross, do you have a response?" Jonathan stopped only a few feet from Dorian. The two men locked eyes, the air between them charged. For a beat, the terminal fell silent, waiting. Cross cleared his throat, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a leader used to controlling the narrative. "Mr. Vale," he began, "on behalf of this airline, I want to offer a full and unconditional apology for what occurred on Flight 228. The treatment you endured was unacceptable, indefensible, and will not be forgotten." The crowd murmured, some skeptical, some relieved. Dorian did not respond immediately. He let the weight of the moment stretch. Then he spoke, his tone calm but edged with steel. "An apology is not enough. This is not about me alone. This is about every passenger who has ever been treated like a trespasser in a space they had every right to occupy. Words are easy. Action is proof." Cross nodded quickly, as though anticipating the rebuke. "You are right. Tonight, I'm announcing an independent investigation into the events on Flight 228, as well as a comprehensive review of all policies related to passenger interactions. Employees involved in discriminatory behavior will be suspended immediately pending review. We will also convene a council of external advisors to help reshape our culture." Reporters scribbled furiously, microphones jostled forward. Dorian's eyes stayed fixed on him. "Investigations and councils can become excuses for delay," he said softly. Yet every person in the terminal leaned in to hear. "If you are serious, you will act now, publicly, transparently." Cross hesitated. For the first time, the Polish cracked. The cameras caught it. His lips pressed into a line, his gaze flicking toward the executives behind him. But the pressure of millions watching was undeniable. He turned back. Then, let this be clear, effective immediately. Captain Gregory Flint, lead flight attendant Iris Navarro, and senior attendant Celeste Marrow are suspended from duty pending termination review. Their actions tonight violated both our policies and our values. Mr. Vale, you are correct, dignity is not negotiable. Gasps rippled across the crowd. The announcement struck like thunder, reverberating through the terminal, spilling instantly across the live streams. Celine whispered breathlessly, 1.8 million. They just confirmed suspensions live. People are going crazy in the comments. Amara exhaled a shaky breath, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She had feared speaking out, feared losing her job, but now she felt a tremor of hope. Dorian did not smile, but he gave a slow nod. It is a start. But understand this: if reforms fail, if dignity is once again treated as optional, I will not stay silent, and I will not stand alone. Tonight has shown that silence is over. The applause that erupted was not the polite clap of a terminal. It was the roar of passengers, reporters, staff, and strangers who understood they had witnessed something larger than a dispute over a seat. It was the roar of recognition, of shared indignation, of hope for change. Celine's camera trembled as she tried to keep her voice steady. 1.9 million. They're calling it the Gate 17 Revolution. Hashtags are everywhere. This is no longer just a story, it's a movement. Jonathan Cross extended a hand toward Dorian. For a long moment, Dorian considered it, the crowd holding its collective breath. Finally, he clasped it, not as a gesture of reconciliation, but as a contract. "If you keep this promise," Dorian said quietly, "you will not just save your airline, you will help reshape an industry." The cameras flashed like lightning. Hours later, the airport was quieter, the press had dispersed, the passengers had gone home, but the digital world still boiled with reaction. Millions replayed the clip of Dorian's words. News anchors analyzed every gesture. Commentators framed it as a watershed moment for corporate accountability. In the solitude of a private lounge, Dorian finally sat. The adrenaline drained, leaving behind both exhaustion and clarity. Amara sat nearby, silent but present, her eyes filled with unspoken gratitude. Selena edited her footage, whispering lines to her audience even as fatigue pulled at her. Dorian leaned back, eyes closed briefly, memories of the night replaying, the shove against his shoulder, the words, "people like you," the moment he nearly surrendered to anger, the voice of his father echoing from decades past, telling him that dignity is fragile, that it must be defended not just for oneself, but for everyone. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number, forwarded through his office. "Thank you. I was denied boarding last year because they said my clothes didn't match my ticket. Watching you tonight gave me courage." Another message followed, then another. Within minutes, dozens poured in, voices of passengers who had endured humiliation, finding hope in what they had seen. Dorian read them quietly, his jaw tightening, his resolve deepening. He understood now that what began in Seat 1A was no longer his story alone. It belonged to countless others. He opened his notes app and began typing the framework of what would become his next step, a foundation dedicated to equity in air travel. It would gather stories, press for policy, fund scholarships for underrepresented youth in aviation. The work was only beginning. As dawn broke over the city outside, streaks of gold painting the horizon, Dorian Vale stood by the window of the lounge. He whispered softly, words meant only for himself, yet echoing the vow he had carried since boyhood. Never again. Not for me. Not for anyone. And with that, the man who had been nearly forced from his rightful seat now prepared to claim a larger one, a seat at the table of change, where dignity would no longer be conditional, and the sky itself would finally belong to everyone. Dorian Vale walked onto that plane as a passenger, but he stepped off as a symbol. What began as 12 minutes of humiliation became a movement that demanded respect for every traveler, regardless of race, status, or appearance. His calm defiance, the courage of a few voices who stood with him, and the undeniable power of millions watching online transformed a personal injustice into a call for systemic change. But the lesson is bigger than one flight. It's about every moment when someone is judged before they are heard, pushed aside before they are seen. It's about the promise that dignity is not earned, it is assumed, and it belongs to all of us. Tonight, let this story remind us to treat every stranger with respect, to challenge the systems that fail us, and to never let silence protect prejudice. If this story moved you, if you believe dignity should never come with conditions, make sure to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel.